darkness enshrouded her. The air was thick with adrenaline and danger, although Guinevere was, in actuality, perfectly safe. But just knowing that he was out there, waiting for her in the dark, watching her, such realizations did nothing to calm her flustered nerves. She and her mentor were back within the abandoned house, where Helena's mechanists had held their meeting last time. Garrett had assured Guinevere that now that he was well aware of her plots and desires, the sultry sadist would not be holding such a meeting there again. Helena was renowned for just how quickly she could fall off the radar when necessary. She was so good at it, in fact, that for years, Garrett had thought her dead. Guinevere sighed hard. It had already been such a stressful week for the young apprentice, and one that she would sooner like to forget. Guinevere could not think about what the demons had ordered her to do, without feeling a cold shudder race across her spine. Kill Garrett? Why would they tell her to do this? The thief had saved her life on more than one occasion, and he meant absolutely everything to her. Even as she stood concealed within that comforting blanket of darkness, the nymph felt her knees begin to quake. She knew that he could be upon her at any moment, that she had to keep moving silently through the darkness in order to evade him, to pass her test. But Guinevere's feet felt cemented to the floor. She squeezed her eyes shut, locking the sulphurous green flares away into her subconscious. The memories now came in droves. Simmons Family Manor, 16 years ago. The tutor pressed his silver-rimmed glasses further up the bridge of his hooked nose. He stared inquisitively at the beckoning child situated at the small mahogany desk. His lips quirked as he attempted to conceal his utter confusion and disbelief from her. Who exactly did Master Simmons think he was fooling? Scholar Frederick was an old friend of the prestigious family. He, as well as a good 2/4 of the staff, had been in the services of the Simmons family since the current lord was in swaddling clothes. They knew him, they knew the family, and they knew that Lord Vladimir Simmons had no children. Certainly, there was the possibility that he had chosen to adopt the stray waif. But this possibility seemed extremely unlikely, given his strong involvement in the Mechanist Order. Hence the task before the aging teacher.
Good morning, Lady Guinevere. Are you ready to begin today's linguistics?
The child looked up meekly and frowned. She didn't want to speak. Every time she had, since coming here, they had persecuted her for it. Teased her. Called her garbage. Barbaric, uncivilized waste.
Guinevere?
Was all she answered him with. Frederick raised his thick grey eyebrow at her, his lips pursing in disdain. This girl was no older than around 3 years or so, yet she seemed strangely worldly and intelligent beyond her years.
That is not a proper response. Use a complete sentence, if you please.
The little girl looked up from the various books and study aids sprawled across her desk. With a somewhat frustrated huff, she did as she had been told.
Yes, I be's ready to begin the lesson.
Her voice was soft, muffled, almost a whisper.
Now, there are at least 2 things wrong with the grammar you just exhibited, Guinevere. Can you point out where you went wrong?
I said bees again.
She grumbled.
Yes, and begins. The word begin is present tense, my dear. It is only pronounced as begins during first-person perspective, such as when one writes a story from a protagonist's viewpoint.
He corrected. Turning to his chalkboard, he began to scribble down a sentence in cursive.
For example, my story begins on a cold and foggy morning in late winter.
His chalk squeaked slightly as he formed the last word, closing it with a period and quotation marks. He turned around, his right hand still held firmly against the board. As expected, Guinevere was paying full attention. She was still a bit young to be using a quill, as Simmons had expressed concern over her wasting ink. So Frederick deigned to instruct her in writing just yet.
As for bees, that is not a word. The correct term is be, but not in this case. When referring to yourself, the correct word is am. Your sentence should have sounded like this, Guinevere. Yes, I am ready to begin the lesson. Do you understand?
Yes, I think so.
Her reply prompted the tutor to exhale a frustrated sigh. He found teaching pupils a second language less taxing, and this was just mere grammar correction. Wasn't it? Taking a seat adjacent from hers, Frederick locked his fingers together just below his chin, and rested it upon his bony digits. Bringing up his index fingers, he adjusted his glasses a second time.
Milady, it is extremely important that you learn to correct your speech impairment, and quickly. You don't want others to speak illy of you, correct?
No.
Guinevere tried to keep her responses to one word again.
That's what I thought. Regardless of where you came from.
A shudder found his person when he remembered the ominous rumors circulating that matter. Simmons returning to his home with his clerical mechanist robe stained in blood. His quirky and defensive disposition. The pagan toddler he had claimed as his own daughter. Again, who exactly did he think he was fooling? But perhaps the most disturbing question, the question on every staff member's mind, what would a mechanist possibly want with a pagan anyway?
Well, regardless, you need to try and act normal from here on out.
Guinevere's eyes shimmered with icy hurt. Where she had come from, she had been cherished, wanted, loved. Even if she wasn't normal, she had known that she was very, very special. A leather-clad hand came down around her mouth. Guinevere shrieked and fought to pull away. The unseen force pressed her firmly into a nearby wall, and another arm wrapped around her waist, forcing her to turn around to face her captor. Garrett's eyes gleamed in a way that would rival any cat.
Found you.
His confident voice proclaimed.
I'm sorry. I wasn't paying attention.
The thief released his grasp on her, and his posture turned stiff. Guinevere couldn't be sure, but she thought he seemed annoyed at her.
How do you expect me to teach you if you never pay attention, Guinevere?
He affirmed her suspicions.
What drew your focus away this time?
I had a memory of my childhood.
And?
Guinevere turned away.
Nothing. Let me try again.
Are you sure you'll be able to focus this time?
I'm sure.
Alright.
Garrett watched her for what seemed like minutes, trying to gauge whether she was lying or not. Even though he was pretty certain that she was, he knew that her training was more important than ever now. She had to push herself, and he had to be tougher on her. If she was ever going to fulfill her desire to break through herself, to defy nature, and become human. He was a large believer in mind over matter. He couldn't recall just who had instilled this belief in him. Perhaps the keepers, most likely Artemis. All Garrett knew was that it could be done. He was living proof of that. His plan was to try and wean away any possible link to Guinevere's true nature. The dark magic, the desire to retreat into the forest. This was yet another reason why he disliked her using her spells. Not because they made it easier on her, and could possibly become a crutch later on in her training, but because they were birthed into existence by her darker element. His apprentice had readily agreed, and Guinevere had instead begun to use a less supernatural approach. The nymph had taken to studying about herbalism in her spare time. Under Garrett's instruction, she had prepared some spore grenades, which were filled with a mixture of toxic, debilitating pollens. They were her answer to the thief's blackjack, as they would eventually serve to knock people unconscious upon inhaling said spores. Garrett hoped that this would help dissuade her from the uncontrollable urges she got to kill when facing danger. Guinevere had also taken to wearing a navy cloth mask around her nose and mouth to block out said spores. Her eyes were even more stunning when they were the only feature Garrett could make out in the darkness of his training house. They were staring up into him now, coaxing him with an inexplicable yearning, and tormenting him with unspoken ire. Not Guinevere's feelings, but rather those of the dormant goddess within, separating her from reality, from her purpose. The beast within screamed at him that this was very wrong. But it was also what Guinevere, the real Guinevere, desired more than anything in the world. And while Garrett still didn't understand such a desire, he wanted her to be happy.
Try to avoid me this time. Remember, you need to get to the roof undetected in order to pass.
With those last instructions, he dashed back into the shadows, and the test resumed. This time, Guinevere did not falter. Even as the pieces of her lost history poked and tormented her mind, she remained focused.